Hi, Rick. How are you? Good to see you.
Hi, John. Pleasure. Thanks for having me.
Of course. Thanks for being here. Rick, I know that you are comfortably retired and
Yeah.
spent the spring in Europe, but you weren't there on vacation. What were you doing in Europe with a rented VW van?
Yeah. So I arrived in Berlin on March 21st, and I spent 32 days in Europe. I picked up a rental van in Berlin and drove it to the Ukrainian border in Poland and registered as a volunteer driver and started driving people Ukrainian refugees wherever they wanted to go. In the end, it was 29 people to 13 countries. I drove 8,500 miles. The GoFundMe on it went to $88,000, and a lot of people were taken care of. And the first question people ask me is, was it dangerous? I'm like, not at all. It was all moms and grandmas and kids. So not only was it rewarding, but it was a very easy and safe thing to do.
Well, I'm glad it was easy and safe. What inspired you to essentially go into a war zone?
Is this a PG recording? I was pissed off at Putin. The guy so bad. My lifetime, I'm 62 years old. You go all the way back to the Vietnam War. There aren't many times when you can tell whether you're on the right side of an argument or not. And in this one, Putin is just a really bad guy, and the Ukrainians don't deserve this. And you can ask all kinds of interesting stories about other wars and genocides and all the rest, but I just felt motivated and compelled to close ranks and show up and see if I could help.
Well, that's an amazing story. And if folks listening want to read more about it, there was a profile of Rick in the Seattle Times a few months back. Um, well, maybe a clumsy segue into something that's less important, but
Well,
certainly
that's
interesting to
important.
this to this audience, which is I was doing some reading and rewinding on the Xbox. It launched nearly 21 years ago. You were responsible for engineering and product developing and creating the Xbox. Take me back. Take us back to Microsoft in the 90s. The only time I remember playing a game on Microsoft before the Xbox was Minesweeper. Shout out to anyone who remembers that game. Although I know there was Flight Simulator and other stuff like that.
On the PC,
Why
yeah.
yeah, why did Microsoft enter the market with its own console?
Well, it's a fun story. In 1999, Sony was out there talking a lot about the merits of the PlayStation, and they were portraying a future in which homes no longer had PCs, but where homes were being run entirely on PlayStations. And that was a really affronting thing to Microsoft, kind of like slapping Microsoft and saying, your stuff's not necessary. And so we took a look at what they were doing. We took a look at the motivation they provided us to take care of our own business. And at the exec retreat in 1999, in April of 1999, we started a conversation. I started a conversation about the different business model and how there were so many different opportunities to do things differently. And coming out of that meeting, I got the assignment to pull together some teams within Microsoft to see who might have some notion about what to do. And we did that, and over a couple months, had some competing teams. One of the teams won out. It was a group from within Windows in DirectX, and we went. I hired the first 100 people on Xbox and wrote the business plan over the next 6 or 8 months.
And you mentioned a term, DirectX. What was that?
I'm sorry. So there was a group within Windows that was responsible for all the graphics, and that was a DirectX group. So it kind of makes sense. They were kind of the gaming group, if you will, for Windows, although they did a lot more than that as well.
So you have a team that came in that won the bid, if you will, to build the console. What were some of the initial challenges you had at the beginning in figuring out what exactly to build? I know there were
The
numerous.
initial challenges were unbelievable. The team that won the bid, as you say, which is a reasonable way of saying it, was a group of 5 people, only 3 of whom showed up. The other 2 bugged out immediately. There was absolutely nobody on this project. So I'd run the hardware businesses at Microsoft for a long time. And I went about recruiting people. Other people just showed up. Guys like Jay Aller just showed up in my office and informed me that he was going to be working for me. But we pulled together a team pretty quickly. And then the hard part was learning the model and predicting what was going to happen. And it was a lot of fun and probably the highlight of my business career, but also incredibly difficult.
Well, one of the things that I believe that was difficult in doing some reading on this and recollections of you, Rick, talking about it in the past is the actual cost of the hardware and how much it costs to build an individual Xbox, and then how much you wanted to sell it for in order to compete with Sony.
Right. So the console business is like the razor and razor blades business. If you buy enough razor blades from me, I'll give you the handle because it's worth it to me. Consoles are the same way. When you sell a console, you're not going to make money on the console. You're going to make it on the games and the accessories, the input devices, and on the Xbox Live subscriptions that you garnish. So the original Xbox never anticipated making a profit, which is pretty funny and very difficult for me because all the decisions I'd ever made in business had to do with maximizing profit.
And so Xbox, it sounds like it's almost a loss leader in a way. Maybe not just for the games, but maybe for Microsoft's strategy long term. Or am I thinking about that wrong?
So at the time, back in 99, 2000, I thought we were bringing a money loser to market, and that all we were ever going to do is lose money. And I was wrong. The first product did lose money. I think it lost a couple $2 billion, believe it or not, which is not a horrible number for Microsoft. But that enabled the company to go on and do the subsequent versions of Xbox. Sorry about the background noise. And those have been very successful, and they built a very successful business. One of the parts you'll enjoy, or your readers might enjoy, listeners might enjoy, is how difficult it was to convince the game companies that Microsoft was serious about going into the console business. Not only did they not believe us because we were a bunch of corporate geeks, but they didn't know me. They didn't know anything about what we were doing. So calling on Electronic Arts or whoever in Japan, Konami, all the others, they just look at you and kind of laugh, going, "There's no way you guys are going to do this." So it was an incredible uphill march.
And not only an uphill march externally facing, but I understand internally facing too. Tell me about the famous or infamous go no go meeting you had about Xbox.
Well, we would do a go no go meeting, basically a status update with a "shall we proceed" question at the end. Actually, you ask it at the front, and then you hope it still stands at the end. Along the way, there were a lot of issues to discuss, but we came to our final one. The final one was Valentine's Day of 2000. And we had built a model that suggested that if we did this and we were successful, that we would lose $800 million over 8 years. And the question put to the meeting that day was, should we proceed or not? And we decided to go for it. We decided that it was a worthwhile endeavor and that perhaps we could outperform. But it was a really, really contentious meeting with lots of Valentine's Day dinners missed that night.
So that kind of tells me it was a long meeting, and if it was a contentious meeting, if you can share in any way, what was Bill Gates' state of mind? What was Steve Ballmer's state of mind? Is there shouting involved, or is it all done very peacefully?
No, it was a lot of anger. Different people care about different things at Microsoft. What I cared about the most was what the business looked like. Bill was much more into what the product could do and how remarkable it would be. Steve was more along the lines of, if we do this, we have to stick with it, and we have to be serious about this. And that was the important part for me as well. When the financials were understood, and when we understood what it was going to take and the commitments we were going to have to make to buy billions of dollars of equipment from all sorts of companies, NVIDIA, Intel, and others, and we said, by the time we launch this product, we'll have a couple $1 billion spent already. And if we say yes at this meeting, we are not going to turn around and say no later. It was something that was quite important. We really did not try to sugarcoat it. We made it quite clear what the company was committing to. And I'm proud of that. And I think that was important because what went on and what happened after that was more or less what we suggested, with a couple of hiccups that ended up losing the company some extra money.
As I'm hearing you tell this story, it feels like tension and disagreement, but healthy, and maybe an indication that Microsoft built its culture and executive team in a really smart way to provide a lot of perspectives to have the best decision. Is that the right way I should be looking at that?
I think you're just a little bit generous on that. I don't think Microsoft spent as much time developing us. I think it was a little bit more sink or swim, but you had to have the right personality for it. You had to be somebody who could take a beating and be resilient and fire right back. And in fact, we loved it. I loved it. It was a great experience. It was hyper serious, and at times you were made to feel like a fool. But most of the times when you were made to feel like a fool, you were a fool. So it was fun, and it wasn't for everybody. It's one thing. If you're not confident, if you're not comfortable in your own skin, if you can't take it and then bounce right back, you had no business being there.
I wonder what those executive offsites were like. Any interesting behind the curtains on how those worked?
Well, this is fun. The way that this all came about, it's a 3-day session, and one of the 2-hour sub sessions was, you get a big piece of paper, a really, really big one, and you write a question down on it. And I wrote something along the lines like, if all these big companies got together and pooled their interests, things like PlayStation, set-top boxes, MSN, AOL, the online services, cellular companies, if they all got together and built a common box that they could put in your house, they could afford to give it away for free because there's so much revenue that would be generated off of that. And so you write that on, I wrote it more succinctly, but on a piece of paper, and you stand there. And so there were 47 of us in the circle. We each had a piece of paper standing, and you can imagine topics are all over the place. But what the meeting organizer then does is he said, okay, if you don't think your topic is all that interesting, drop it on the floor and go stand behind the person who has the interesting topic. So they go through a couple of rounds of that until they get it down to 4 to 8, something like that, topics. And by the time it was done, I had 13 people standing behind me who wanted to talk about it, including Bill, who wanted to hear more.
Wow, that's cool, and certainly a vote of confidence. I'm sure there's some trepidation in those types of meetings too.
I don't think it was so much a vote of confidence as it was a real genuine interest in what is this guy talking about. My perspective was more of a business and hardware perspective, and that was unusual at that time.
Mm. So let's go back a little bit further, and one of the reasons that you became an executive was you built a 9-figure, I think we said before the call, $600 million
right,
hardware and peripherals business, including the mouse.
Yeah.
Can you talk a little bit about incubating that product, what it was when you started working on it and what it became?
So I joined in 1987, and my first job was to be the product manager for the mouse. None of your listeners will remember what the original mouse looked like, and it had already launched by the time I got there. But you may remember what people affectionately referred to as the Dove Bar mouse. It was the first white plastic one that was a little better shaped. And I was the product manager for that, and I didn't know what a product manager is supposed to do, so I was on the job learning. And the group was a small group at that point, just 13 people. And subsequently, I rose up in the ranks, which was pretty easy to do. There were only 2,000 people in the company, so promotions came pretty quickly, and I was very, very fortunate to be there at the right time. But then we launched things like the natural keyboard, the keyboard that split, and some gaming input devices. If anybody out there remembers my Folly, the Barney doll, we did that in the mid 90s. So we did all kinds of hardware products, and we were a little bit of a weirdo, that's the wrong word, a bunch of outliers at Microsoft, where everybody else is working on things like Windows and Office and programming tools. So we were successful with our products, so we had a lot of freedom to go off and do what we wanted to do.
That's really cool. Maybe expand on the Barney doll just for a sec. If I remember, was that a doll that you talked to?
So you really remember this, do you? So no, it was a doll that had a radio in it, and you could connect the radio to a box that you could connect to your VCR, and then you could either play VCR tapes that we'd modified, or you could watch the program on PBS and watch the Barney show. And the transmission would be connected to the doll, and the doll would participate in the TV show. So Barney might look over at you, hey, this is my favorite song, and then sing along with the song. We sold almost 700,000 Barneys the first year we brought them to market at $99. And it was a super cool product that was a complete folly on my part because it was very hard to follow up.
Oh, I see. Okay. Well, I wanted to ask you about something that I heard you first talk about maybe 20 years ago when we worked together. And you talked about this concept of pioneers and settlers. And we were talking before, I misremembered it as hunters and gatherers. But talking about the importance of finding the right people when you're incubating something, and then also finding the right people. Like, are those the same people when you're trying to grow or scale or not, and why? Could you talk a little bit about that concept, and then also how it came to you?
It really is a super fun topic, and it's I think it'll last forever, really. So when people came to the organization, we'd ask them to work on one of the existing products, and since then I came up with a term of you're learning to eat your vegetables. You know, you don't really want to work on the existing product. You don't want to work on, if you hired me at Microsoft today, I don't want to work on Excel version 17, right? Or whatever number they're up to. But when you do that and you go through the whole process of defining it and the work breakdown and writing the specs and scheduling it and resource allocating it and then doing your test releases and your beta and getting the thing to market, you learn an amazing amount and an incredibly valuable amount about how to get a product to market, right? And so I used to talk about that as sort of earning your battle chevrons. Okay, you've proven to us you can do this. At that point, it will become clear to everybody involved whether you should be working on a version 1.0 product or you should continue on the next version of the current project. There are people who work for me who can ship incredibly complex things because they were such process experts. And I'd call those guys farmers, right? It's how do I get 3% more corn out of my field this year? Very, very process driven, very careful people who always deliver on time, right? And then there are others who are like, this is Luddite work. You guys are boring. You farmers are boring. We are pioneers. We want to go out and reinvent the world and figure out something new. And for those folks, we would provide that opportunity, given that they'd gone through the first part of it. And that's where ideas like force feedback joystick or a television remote control or Microsoft speakers for the TV, or the keyboard, the ergonomic keyboard. All these came from people who were given the opportunity to go off and kind of make their own movie, to do their own pioneering. There were a lot of failures. There was a lot of, okay, well, that was fun. Let's start off scratch all over again. But highly necessary, highly valuable. And then just one more thought on that. For that system to work, you have to make your pioneers feel like they're not going to die. Most pioneers, when they got on their horses and they rode off into the sunset, had no idea if they were going to make it through the night. You actually have to make it comfortable and have some confidence, both that they'll be taken care of in the organization, but also that they'll have a career path around what they're doing, and that the people who are the settlers aren't all going to be the people who have the better career opportunities. And that's a key part, or there really is no payback in going off to be a pioneer.
And is part of that making it okay to fail as well?
Yeah, I've had people fail, come in and like in the movies, they'll toss me their badge, like I guess I'm fired, right? And I'm like, hey, no, like we just spent so much money educating you, and you are now more valuable than you've ever been. Get back out there and try again. And people had to believe that. They really had to believe that they had the opportunity to fail.
I love that. Well, Rick, thanks so much for talking to me today, going a little bit down memory lane, and for providing a lot of thoughts and guidance to the listeners.
My absolute pleasure, John. Thank you for seeking me out.
You got it.